Every single day, probably dozens of times a day, we all do this little digital ritual. We log in. We punch in a username, a password, and poof, we're in. But have you ever really stopped to think about what's happening behind that screen? That whole process is called authentication. And believe it or not, it's one of the most critical and honestly fascinating parts of our digital lives. So let's pull back the curtain.
And that right there, that's the fundamental question of all digital security, isn't it? It's not just about saying who you are, it's about proving it. And in this explainer, we're going to dig into exactly how that proof works.
Okay, so first things first, we gotta get our terms straight because this is super important. Identification, that's just you raising your hand and saying, hey, I'm user123. It's a claim. But authentication, that's the bouncer at the club door looking at your ID and saying, all right, user123, prove it. It's the step that verifies your claim, and it is the absolute frontline defense in computer security. So here's the game plan. We'll start with the 4 fundamental ways you can prove who you are. Then we'll take a really close look at the password, why we use it, and why it's so broken. After that, we'll explore some of the stronger alternatives, and finally, we'll see how this all clicks together in the real world.
All right, so how do you prove you are who you say you are? It sounds like it could be super complex, right? But it turns out, pretty much every security system in the world boils down to just 4 basic methods.
Yep, it all comes down to one or more of these 4 things. Something you know is the one we're all familiar with, your password or your PIN. Something you have is a physical object, like your phone when you get that 2-factor code. Something you are is biometrics, your unique physical traits like a fingerprint. And last, something you do is about your unique behaviors, like how you type or sign your name.
Okay, let's zoom in on that first one, the password. It's the one we all know and, well, let's be honest, the one we all kind of hate, right? It's been the go-to for decades, but boy, does it have some serious problems.
So you might be thinking, a server just has this giant, scary list of all our usernames and passwords just sitting there. Thankfully, that's not how it works. Not at all. Your password isn't stored as you typed it. Instead, it gets put through this one-way mathematical process called hashing. Honestly, the best way to think about it is like putting your password in a blender. You can't ever glue the pieces back together to see what it was originally. So let's walk through this. When you create a password, the system does something really clever. First, it adds a little piece of random data called a salt. This is so important. It makes sure that even if you and I picked the exact same password, our stored codes would look totally different. Then, that password plus salt combo gets tossed into the blender, the hash function, and only that scrambled up result gets stored. Right, so when it's time to log in, the system doesn't try to reverse that blender. That's impossible. Instead, it takes the password you just typed, grabs your unique salt from its file, and runs it through the exact same blender. It then compares the new scrambled up result to the one it has on file. If they match, boom, you're in. The system knows it's you without ever knowing your secret.
Okay, so this sounds pretty solid, doesn't it? The password is never stored, it's never sent across the internet, so how in the world do hackers still manage to steal them in these massive data breaches we hear about all the time? Well, the biggest vulnerability here is something called an offline dictionary attack. If a hacker manages to steal that file of hashed passwords, they don't have to fight the live website. They can take it home, so to speak, to their own super powerful computers. And they don't try to reverse the hash. They just start guessing. They take huge lists of common passwords, millions of them, and run them through the same hashing process to see if they can find a match. With modern computers, it's a numbers game they can often win. And if you think a complex password will save you, well, get a load of this number. In one study of a university's password file, where everyone was forced to use complex passwords, attackers were still able to crack almost 40% of them. It just goes to show that even when we think we're being clever, we humans are just so predictable that a machine making trillions of guesses can figure us out. That's something you know is just too easy to guess.
So yeah, clearly just relying on something you know is a recipe for disaster. That's why the whole security world is pushing us towards other factors. So let's look at those other pillars, something you have and something you are.
First up, physical tokens, like the cards in your wallet. And there's a huge difference between the old school ones and the new ones. A memory card, like one with a magnetic stripe, is pretty dumb. It just holds data. But a smart card, the one with a little chip, has a tiny computer inside. That little microprocessor means it can actually think and participate in the security process, which makes it way more secure. All right, now for the cool sci-fi stuff, biometrics. This is all about something you are. We're talking about systems that can recognize you from your unique physical traits, like the fingerprint scanner on your phone, facial recognition, or even systems that scan the pattern of your eyeball.
But here's the catch with biometrics. They're not a simple yes or no like a password. It's all about probabilities, and this creates a constant tug of war. You have the false match rate, the chance an imposter gets in, and you have the false non-match rate, the chance it locks you out, even though it's really you. If you make the system super strict to prevent false matches, you're going to end up getting locked out of your own phone more often. It's a tricky balancing act.
Okay, so we've got passwords, tokens, biometrics, all these different tools. How does a system, like your bank, decide which ones to use? Why is it so much tougher to get into than, say, a random discussion forum? Well, it all boils down to one word: risk.
And this is really where the rubber meets the road. Security pros use this idea called levels of assurance. It's just a fancy way of saying you match the strength of the lock to the value of what's behind the door. For a level 1 site, like a forum, a simple password is fine. But when you get to level 3, accessing sensitive company data, you'll need more: a password plus something you have, like a code from your phone. That's multi-factor authentication. And for the highest level 4 systems, you might need all 3 pillars: something you know, have, and are. To see how this plays out in the real world and how it can go really wrong, let's look at a fascinating case study: the ATM. Back in the day, ATMs were pretty darn secure. Each machine had its own private, dedicated line that went straight to the bank's processor. It was simple, and it was tough to mess with. But as you can imagine, having a private phone line for every single ATM was crazy expensive. So to cut costs, banks made a change. They started connecting their ATMs to their regular internal network, the same one office employees used, which then connected out to the processor. It was cheaper, for sure, but it opened up a giant security hole. And that created a massive problem, because while the PIN itself was still encrypted, pretty much everything else, your card number, your balance, was flying across that internal network totally unprotected. An attacker on that network could see it all. Even worse, they could potentially change the messages. They could tell an ATM to spit out $1,000 while telling the main processor that everything was fine, no transaction happened. And this brings us to the absolute key takeaway. The ATM was using strong crypto for the PIN, right? That little piece was secure, but the system around it was weak. And having one strong link in a rusty, weak chain doesn't do you any good. Security has to be built into the entire system, from start to finish.
So that brings us full circle. We know passwords are kind of broken because, well, we're human and we're predictable. We have better, stronger tools like biometrics and physical keys. So what's the holdup? How are we going to be proving who we are in 5 or 10 years? I guess the real question is this finally the decade we say goodbye to the password for good?